It is the absolute worst case of child neglect I've seen in my 15 and a half years as coroner of Cherokee County. The living conditions in that house by this innocent handicapped child was not fit for any human to be, even a dog.
These sickening living conditions inside of a horrifying South Carolina home led to the tragic death of a disabled teen girl. And investigators say it was her own family who left her to die. I'm going to be speaking with a South Carolina defense attorney to uncover the gruesome details of this awful case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. This is one of the saddest and most horrifying cases we've ever covered here on Sidebar. I think that's fair to say. I mean, I just have to provide that preface to what we're about to talk about. Because it's hard always talking about the death of a child, that's a given, but it becomes even more cruel when we talk about the death of a disabled child, a child who was murdered. I'm talking about 14-year-old Heather Baynard. Now, she was afflicted with cerebral palsy, and she was left by her family to die. And this is a case of child neglect that has left authorities shocked.
Our investigators, their words to me as they began to brief me on this case, Sheriff, this is one of the worst cases of child abuse that we've ever seen being investigated here in our office. These are the type of cases that truly pull on our heartstrings. For those officers who were at the scene, dealing with family, doing investigation, interviews, going into the home, seeing those deplorable conditions, as well as the medical professionals who tried to revive and bring this child back upon the arrival at the hospital. So these cases, they hurt. They hurt for all of us, and our heart goes out to this 14-year-old that life has been lost.
So this horrific story begins back on April 11th, 2022, when the girl's father, David Baynard, brought her to the Spartanburg Regional Medical Center in South Carolina after discovering that she was unresponsive and cold to the touch. She was pronounced dead just hours later. And when police show up to the family's home the following day, what they would discover was really nothing short of a nightmare.
They found the home to be in deplorable conditions, as the coroner has mentioned. The home was full of feces, urine, flies, maggots, roaches. The conditions in this home required the officers in our crime scene unit to don Tyvek suits along with respirators in order for them to process the scene for evidence in this case.
Investigators find junk and garbage piled high up, several feet high. There are 40 animals, some infested with fleas. They're malnourished. There's urine and feces from these animals spread out all over. One of the pets was dead. According to local reporting, 2 of the puppies had to be euthanized because of the state they were in. Cherokee County Sheriff Steve Mueller said that during their investigation, the amount of feces in the home was so overwhelming that it created an ammonia-type smell. So what happens after the death of this young girl? Police arrest Heather's parents, David and Bobbie Jo Baynard, as well as her brother Edward. All 3 were charged with murder, inflicting great bodily injury, and unlawful neglect that led to this child's gruesome death. And what's even more tragic, as if this wasn't tragic enough, is that Heather's care was supposed to be left in the hands of her brother. Why? Because he was an employee for Access Home Care. He made over $25,000 over an 18-month period as Heather's personal care aide. But police could tell by the severity of her condition that he was not taking care of her. He was doing the complete opposite.
It appears that the mother and father, who were the caregivers, had failed to properly care for this child, and we have evidence already, early stages of this investigation, that could have been a period of time that went more than a year without seeking any medical attention for this child.
So what happens? The 3 stand trial last week, and they were all convicted on all charges across the board. During the 4-day trial, solicitor Barry Barnett argued to the jury just how cruel their actions truly were, saying the suffering that she went through, not for a minute, not for an hour, not for a day, but for weeks, ladies and gentlemen, if that's not malice, I don't know what is. And to have that little girl in that situation where she can't escape, she's totally dependent on them. And Barnett told the jury that the animal excrement found inside the home, It was what was responsible for infecting the girl's skin and her other tissues. And in graphic terms, Barnett told the court that Heather's body showed extreme signs of disintegration. Doctors, coroners, they testified that they had never seen anyone in such horrible shape. In fact, one witness who was at the hospital said that her legs had rotted so badly that they looked like raw meat. The autopsy confirms that she had been neglected for months. The judge ended up sentencing Heather's parents to life in prison for murder. Additionally, they were also sentenced to 20 years for great bodily injury upon a child and 10 years for unlawful neglect of a child. By the way, this is not the first time the Baynards have been accused of cruelty towards those in their care. We checked out both David and Bobbie Jo on TruthFinder, the powerful background checker that we use to research our stories. In 2004, apparently David Baynard pled guilty to multiple charges, including torture of animals and desecration of a tombstone or grave marker. The murder charge that he was convicted of is listed there too. Bobbie Jo was found guilty of the same crimes back in 2004. She also has charges listed on there for writing bad checks. That was later dismissed. And as you can see, TruthFinder is a really useful tool that we use here on Sidebar. But even if you don't work in true crime, it can just be an excellent resource to give you some peace of mind. I mean, after all, it's one of the largest public record search services in the United States. And with a paid subscription service, you can get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. So if you're interested, by the way, right now you can get 50% off of your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/LC Sidebar. As for Edward, the son, the brother, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison for murder, 20 years for great bodily injury, and 10 years for unlawful neglect. But it is our understanding all of those sentences will be served concurrently. To break this down, let me bring on South Carolina criminal defense attorney and civil rights attorney, Tyler Bailey. Tyler, thanks so much for coming on. I mean, your profession is about protecting the rights of those who can't protect themselves. When you hear a story like this, what do you think?
This is the absolute worst story I've ever read concerning child neglect, and that it rose to the extent of being considered murder. I mean, she had cerebral palsy. A child should be able to trust their parents and their older siblings to take care of them. This right here was sinister. It was, it was demonic what they did to this poor girl. And the solicitor up there, they did a good job prosecuting this case and sending a message that should be sent to anybody thinking that, if parents aren't going to take care of their kids, we as a community and jurors will step up, prosecutors will step up, law enforcement will step up to send a message to make sure kids are protected. Hopefully that's loud and clear here.
It's one thing to say kids are defenseless in and of themselves, young children, but to have a girl who's disabled like this, there's literally nothing she can do to protect herself. And this is the environment she was born into. It's honestly difficult to not get angry. It's difficult to not get emotional about this. But going to the law for a second, from a legal perspective, this wasn't necessarily a slam dunk case of murder, right? Because if you look at murder, I looked up the statute, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's the killing of any person with malice aforethought, either express or implied. There has to be an intent there to kill her, right? What do you think led the jury to believe that this was a case of murder as opposed to something less?
I think if you look at it, the malice and forethought and the length of time that they left their daughter in this condition, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. They were intentionally having her live in conditions like this. And it was not a slam dunk case because you just heard they were charged with child neglect as well. I think it took the prosecutor's office to look further and say, this is deeper than neglect. This is murder. They intentionally did this. It was not just they were busy doing something else. There was some forethought in what happened. So they would have to really do a good job in explaining that to the jury and laying out evidence about how they went through a process in doing this.
We didn't have the ability to cover this trial. We don't have the footage necessarily, but I have to tell you about something that happened in this trial, a statement that was made that kind of stuck with me. I haven't heard anything like this before, but according to reporting, one witness actually testified during the trial that it would have been better if Heather was killed swiftly instead of enduring such a long, terrible, lasting suffering. And I want to make it clear that obviously no child should ever have to go through anything like that. No child should ever be killed. But the idea that it would have been better if she was put out of her misery, than to have to suffer like this? I mean, that's a statement that resonates with me. I imagine it's a statement that resonated with the jury.
Definitely. And then I think looking at her brother, who was a caretaker, employed as a caretaker, you can't be literally a caretaker by profession and accidentally leave your sister in a situation like this. I mean, I think that goes to show the type of people who were taking care. I should not even use the word taking care.
Yeah.
Who were holding hostage their daughter and their sister and putting her in these conditions.
He was apparently a registered nurse and a certified personal care assistant. He's assigned to his sister. Did it just seem like he was, pocketing the money while not really taking care of his sister and just, letting her wither away? This is his own blood. This is his own family. Have you heard anything like this before?
Never have heard anything like this before. And I think that even goes further to the legal issue of intent. That, as a professional who they have an oath, I believe, that they take as registered nurses as well. I mean, they have a duty and obligation to take care and render aid to the person they're assigned a caretaker for. He was obviously intentional enough to receive the money, spend the money, but rendering aid to his daughter, his sister, absolutely not.
And by the way, going back to his sentence, I mentioned 30 years, what was it, 20 years, 10 years, running concurrently. That means the max he would be in prison is 30 years, correct me if I'm wrong, but could he be released sooner? And do you agree with that sentence?
Well, I think it should have been a consecutive sentence here, where 30, 20, 10, 60 years would have been appropriate here. And then if he wanted to take it up on appeal or apply for parole or something like that later on, he has the ability to do so. But I think in cases like this, the sentence needs to send a message as a society as what we feel is acceptable and conduct we believe has absolutely no place here. And so I think a consecutive sentence would have been more appropriate. And so he could technically be out sooner than 30 years if he makes parole. He'll be eligible for parole at some period of time in his sentence.
Does he have to serve like 85% or something like that? I don't know what the rules are under South Carolina.
That's correct, about 80% of his sentence.
Let me ask you this. There's another, I don't even know what the right word of it is. Sinister? Let's go with sinister. Sinister detail. Chilling detail is probably the best word from the story. That Heather's father, he actually brings her to the hospital, and according to witnesses, he didn't seem very concerned for his daughter's well-being because he's apparently sitting in the waiting room playing on his cell phone while doctors, again, were working to try to revive his daughter. When you hear that, I'm sure that aspect of it obviously hurts his case, but what level of cruelty are we talking about here? And also intent, right? Intent that he didn't care if she lived or died.
Did not care if she lived or died. The level of cruelty is off the charts. I mean, the photographs of the residents it looks like a tornado ran through there. The description of the animals that had been euthanized, the smell of vomit. This is what their daughter with cerebral palsy was living through. And then the description of her legs rotted to the extent they seemed like raw meat. I mean, when I was reading over this again, literally was about to shed tears while I was sitting in the courthouse reading over the description of this. I mean, it's absolutely terrible. And the fact that he brought her there, one, maybe he thought that would save him down the road, thinking I'm bringing my daughter to the hospital to show that I care. But if anything, any parent would have brought their daughter to the hospital months before this happened. If anything, it seemed that it was intentional to try to lessen any culpability they could try to put on him for, murder in this situation.
By the way, Tyler, one other thing, and I couldn't find this in my research, maybe you can let us know. The death penalty could technically be on the table for something like this, right? Do you know why it maybe wasn't?
Yeah, well, the prosecutor, the lead solicitor, could have put death penalty as a possible penalty for them. And I think possibly just with the appeal process, the allegations of child neglect, intent versus this actually being a case of neglect, they probably just didn't want to waste the government's resources or expend those resources on 2 decades worth of appeals on whether the death penalty should be applied here. Because I think the jury probably would have voted for it, and the judge probably would have implemented it if they were convicted.
Do you, and correct me if I'm wrong, do you cover a lot of abuse cases or child neglect cases like this, or have you? Because the question I ask is, you know, I don't know the circumstances of what led someone to do this or why they did it. But one of the things that I've heard, a common theme is, you know, it's just too much. I don't know how to take care of for the children. Especially if it's a child that has special needs or disabled. What are the resources for families? If this is too much for you, instead of leaving your child to die or abusing your child, what are the resources that the state would make available to help in these kinds of situations? Because I imagine that is a conversation that comes up quite a bit in these kinds of criminal cases.
Yeah, there's plenty of resources out there that are available. You have the Department of Social Services that provides resources, several other community groups. There's federal aid, there's state aid to provide financial resources. So resources isn't the question here. And a lot of times in child neglect cases, you may hear of diaper rash, right? Or something where they weren't looking at a child and the child fell down some stairs. In those situations, individuals are still criminally prosecuted, and sometimes they're able to work out some sort of a plea arrangement and a parenting plan. But this case is completely different. There cannot be an excuse that they did not know what to do. This was overwhelmingly thought out in how they were intentionally torturing their daughter. That's the difference here. And I think that's what led to it being murder. There is neglect, but it was murder here, which was really the nail in the coffin for these parents. The facts don't demonstrate this was just a situation where parents did not have the resources to take care of the child.
Let me bring this back to Heather as we close it out, because I want to read you a little portion from her obituary. And Heather is described as, quote, "The princess, feather, wee Anne, or kudzu girl, she was the rainbow Pegasus unicorn you never saw coming. Defying the odds since her birth, she deeply touched all who came into her path." And then tragically, it goes on to say, she adored her daddy and brother as well as her people and anyone that took the time to talk to her. Just again, it's like it's tough to compose yourself when you hear that. But here's what we will say. This is a tragic case. There was a sense of justice that they are now incarcerated. They were found guilty. They're incarcerated. The brother, presumably for decades. And our thoughts go out to Heather's family, who you just have to imagine are enduring what is an unthinkable tragedy. This is devastating for them, and hopefully they get this love and the support that they need, because I'm sure they need it. Tyler Bailey, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate you talking about this. I know it's not an easy one, but appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.